When he later thought about that day, academician Alvis Sebastian always wondered how weird it felt. But not before or during Mr. Cart's revelation-filled story, but after he finished saying it. There he was, this weird, malformed, vat-grown creature, sitting in the middle of Provost Baird's old-school office, destroying all the preconceived notions the academicians had about the old domain. He talked about meeting major historical figure, the Prophet Lute herself, and here Sebastian still often had to correct his own thoughts, which automatically qualified Lute as a man, like it was just some random thing he did last week. But then he finished talking and nothing changed. No window to old glory and wisdom opened, no profound meaning or goal for the future was found. Instead, Anahita Baird simply nodded to Sebastian to turn off all the recording machines and moved on to more mundane tasks, because Mr. Cart might have been a literal walking relic, but he was also still their contracted worker, and his job was not yet done. Of course, Sebastian was also well aware that the Provost was not done with that interview. Sure, she might have stopped asking questions for now, but he knew that she and her entire inner circle of academicians will soon meticulously pore over every single word, cross-referencing it with every and all historical records they had available. But for now, she still was a woman focused on her plan, and she needed Mr. Cart to accomplish it. And the job was, seemingly, simple. Find a missing scientist, something that Cart Logistics has done for Academy before. Only this time, things were a tad more complicated. The woman in question was one Scylla Correz, and Sebastian immediately felt odd when he heard that name, because he had not heard it before, and his job description demanded him to know every single academician, past and present, and, in some rare cases, even future ones. He was also surprised by the way Anahita described this researcher. Usually, when she talked about her fellow academicians, the Provost used words like idiots, morons, and utter irredeemable imbeciles who are only useful because their parents were rich enough to give them education and access to old records. But when it came to talk about this Correz, the old woman was surprisingly tight-lipped and oddly respectful. She described her as a prominent expert in her field, whatever that field might be, and went into some oddly specific details when it came to describing her looks. There was some history there, Sebastian thought, but he did so very quietly and in a very dark corner of his head, because the Provost scared the shit out of him and he never wanted to get on her bad side. Then, however, came problems. Not only Anahita didn't have a single clue where this Correz woman might be, she also suspected that other parties may be looking for her. It meant that the job had to be done quietly to avoid tipping off any third party, but fortunately, Mr. Cart seemed to be rather competent when it came to moving around undetected. Still, finding the woman was the difficult part, and it was obvious that she didn't want to be found, as Anahita offered only a handful of not very promising leads. Lead number 1 were some probes that Correz and her research team apparently deployed in some distant solar systems of the sector, and finding and investigating these probes could give some insights, if not into Scylla's current whereabouts, then at least into her objectives. Lead number 2 was something about conducting a diplomatic meeting with aristocrats of the Persian League, but Anahita took one look at Cart Logistics officers, a one-eyed zealot, a half-machine pirate, a clone assassin and a malformed freak, and everyone immediately agreed that perhaps they were not the best team for such work. But if all else failed, then they'd have to give it a try anyway. And then conversation came to the third lead, and a look of sheer disgust appeared on Provost's face. "There is a man," she started, and I use the term lightly, "from Tritakian Executive Board, Ryan Arroyo, if I remember correctly. Here's his profile reads like any other corporate suit. Rich, well-educated, well-groomed, ruthless when it comes to money. I know some people that joke that Tritac exec could sell their own mothers if they could, and Arroyo actually did sell his own mother for organs some 2 decades ago. A scum, in short. But there is one interesting tidbit in his profile, and do not ask me how I managed to learn it. None of you would like the answer. Still, deep within his bio, buried in boring reports of corporate meetings, is this little gem. Apparently, Mr. Arroyo had, on 2 different occasions, openly and vocally disagreed with Tritakian CEO Artemisia's son during board meeting. "And is that weird?" Mr. Cart asked, and Varuna turned to him immediately. "Very, boss. Tritak leadership is about as eager to admit their mistakes as members of the Lydic Path. The CEO has access to best information money can buy and best tech that analyzes that information. So, if you disagree with the boss, you imply that the entire corporation is mistaken or wrong, and people who say that tend to be reassigned, usually into the ground. The fact he did this twice means he must have some powerful friends. Or perhaps Madame Sun is grooming him as a potential successor," Anahita said to no one in particular. "Ah, but pay it no mind. The important part is that he is greedy, like all Tritak Corp drones, and will help you find her if you make it profitable for him. Expect some kind of favor to perform, but don't worry, I already sent him a very convincing message." "And we are pretty decent at doing favors for powerful people," Mr. Cart said. "One question, though. How exactly did this man get involved with this Caress woman?" "That's," Anahita began, and her eyes darted around for a moment. "That is something Miss Caress or Mr. Arroyo would have to explain by themselves. I sadly lack all the details there. Still, if you decide to go to him, do drop my name. It should make him a bit more cooperative and less prone to screw you over completely, though still do expect being screwed over." "Of course, he's a suit after all. Is there anything else you can tell us? If not, then we shall be going to get this woman back to you. Oh, and thanks for the tea, Provost. Think it was the first time I had a chance to taste it personally." She nodded, and the company of her bizarre guests left, leaving Anahita alone with Sebastian. He knew the old woman enough to quietly hand her a glass of vodka when the doors closed. Then, after some thought, he put an entire bottle of it on her table. "Do you think we should have dissected him?" she asked. "Well, no, not really," Sebastian replied. "I mean, it may come to it if your plan fails, madam, but if it works out, we'll have a lot more research material than we could ever process." "Don't underestimate human curiosity, Alvis. Now go. Oh, and once you're back in your office, do send messages, both to our dear old Admiral and to Mr. Dowd. Tell them I have some interesting information for them to purchase at their earliest convenience." Sebastian nodded. He hated when his boss talked like that, cause it usually meant that someone would die in the forthcoming future. But since he liked this job too much to object, he did what she asked without a word of complaint and returned to work. And only then, once his shift was done, he drank himself into unconsciousness. And as Sebastian drank, command staff of Cart Logistics came back into the fleet and returned to Mr. Cart's cabin through his private secret airlock. There was a fair bit of talking on the shuttle back. Mostly, everyone was asking the boss if his story really was true. Zala, however, seemed to be caught up on something else. "You know, Chief," she said after House asked about a dozen questions about existence of domain superweapons, "now that I think about it, it must feel like you're living amongst complete savages here. Compared to domain, living here in Persian Sector now must be like living in a museum, surrounded by rock-wielding barbarians." "Not entirely," the boss replied. "Yes, this place does lack megastructures or planet-sized cities, but it's not really that different. As I said, there were millennia when Domain just completely stagnated and nothing changed, and I think that this lack of most advanced tech Domain had on its core worlds actually helped here, cause when the gates collapsed, people in this area of the galaxy were not as reliant on clones or advanced machines doing their work for them. But if you mean the people here, Zala, then, well, I don't really have much comparison. Lud was the only actual Domain human I have ever encountered face to face and talked to. Hell, almost all of what I know about Old Domain I learned from her, and to be honest, I don't really have a way of knowing if she wasn't lying to me or admitting something. Well, she was the prophet, so I guess she'd have to be economical with truth. But the important part, the clone uprising and collapse of the gate, is still real, and that's what really matters. But I have to ask, boss, you know I have to. How was she? As a person, I mean? You said she was curious when she was young, but I'm sure she became much more than that as she grew up. Well, the curiosity stayed, that I can tell for sure. She still had, unlike most of Golden Domain humans, this drive to explore everything around her, to learn new things, and believed that if all the people won't wake up from their decadence, the domain would fall apart sooner or later. And she must have been charismatic enough to convince enough people to form the Ludic Church. But I didn't really know her. She just talked to me several times, probing me for answers and thoughts, and back then I wasn't really capable of thinking all that much. Only Varuna really taught me how to interact with people properly. I see. No wonder you're pretty much inseparable then. But one more thing about Lud. Do you maybe have a picture or a video of her? I'd like to know how the prophet looked. I know it makes no sense, but... Zala started rambling, but Mr. Cart raised his hand and cut her off. Sure I do. I can show you. Nothing special though, just a freeze frame from onboard security system. It was a damn miracle it survived my escape here. He picked up a datapad, typed something on it and handed it to Zala, whose eyes immediately went wide. House, Varuna and Disco looked over her shoulder. Wow. You call them golden humans, sure, but I didn't expect she'd really be wearing and having all this gold. And what are those glowing lines on her face and arms? Implants. From what she said, you wouldn't really find a human being without them back then. Well then, and here both the Ludic Church and the Ludic Path say the prophet considered all implants as heretical and impure. If only they knew. Maybe don't show this picture to anyone else, Chief. They're not going to react well to that. Hell, even I now have something to think about. Having crisis of faith? Well, I had that one already, back above Jangala. No, it's just... well, I don't really know. This is a lot to process. But worry not, it shouldn't affect my work here. I just need a while to think about it. You do that, but wait a moment. We need to get some things explained first. For example, really, House, you had a bet I was an alien? The old pirate shrugged. Aye, Captain. Well, you have to say you do look weird, so I thought maybe you're some kind of cross between an alien and a human, or something like that. I mean, you said Domain explored most of the galaxy. Surely they did find some aliens out there. Some, from what I know, but not in the way you think. Lud told me humans found 2 other intelligent species, but they were not spacefaring by the time Early Domain found them, so they were conquered and destroyed. Well, one of them, at least. The other one she described as literal sentient trees, whose planet got quarantined because everything on its surface, including the trees themselves, were deadly to humans. So they were cordoned off, and the entire network of satellites was placed above their worlds to keep them from ever expanding. Lud said humanity used the place as a research base for a while, until some time when they decided they can't learn anything more from the trees and glassed the place from orbit. And that was over 20 millennia ago, so I doubt they stored any alien DNA to put inside me when I was still in the tank. Well, damn, House said, taken aback by this tale. He really had no idea how to respond to this revelation, so he just turned his head and said, Well, what is more surprising is that our good Dr. Disco guessed properly. Was it luck, Doctor? Or did you really suspect something? Luck, mostly, Disco said humbly. And a bit of educated guess. I may not appreciate my upbringing, but the schools were worth it, especially the special lessons for the most privileged students, even though I was not really able to appreciate it when I was attending them. But I only guess that you may be from the Domain, Commander. I had no idea what or who you really were, and now that I know, I have a request. We are in a dangerous line of work. Should something ever happen to you, I'd like to have the right to dissect your corpse." Varuna cracked her fist at that, but Mr. Cat raised his hand to calm her down. "Can't really stop you when I'm dead, Doc, so sure, knock yourself out. Just keep in mind that I will probably start dissolving into biomass the moment I drop, so you'll have to work fast." "Good. Then it will be a challenge. I will begin working on a special cryopod to store your remains. Not that I hope we will ever need it, of course," he added when Varuna threw him a death glare. "Yes, good. But before you all go, I'd like to address something else. There is, something else about our fleet that Anahita Baird knows. Something that you don't know. And I'm sure she will use it to blackmail us at some point, so I'd like you to at least know what is happening and why. But, well, I suppose it's not really going to be pretty, so let's just get to the point. Midnight, come out and say hello." Everyone stared at the boss confused, while Varuna moved a step closer towards him, as if trying to shield her old friend from a shitstorm that was about to happen. But then, nothing happened, and House raised a questioning eyebrow at Mr. Cat, unaware as to what was happening. The boss muttered something in his helmet, and suddenly, nearby screen flashed and presented a digitalized face of Tritakian founder, Marianne DeWitt.
"Yes, hello. I am Midnight Dissonant. You may know me from the name of one of the ships in your fleet, and I would have preferred to be informed of such situation beforehand, Pilot Cart,"
she said sternly, as all faces in the room turned to her. "I know, but that way it's more natural and may make you seem more trustworthy and believable." For a moment there was only silence, but then House first realized what was going on.
"Oh, fuck me, Captain,"
he said with a bright smile.
"I knew you went around, but this... Damn, we're a fucking traveling circus with freaks from everywhere."
Zala's eyes almost popped out of her head when realization got to her.
"You have got to be shitting me, Chief. One of them was in our fleet all along, and by the looks of it, it's one of those smart ones. I know I'm always talking about being open-minded, but seriously, what the fuck?"
Disco, on the other hand, just stared, and while his face was perfectly neutral, Varuna, who knew how to read subtle hints, realized that the man was about one wrong word, hell, one wrong breath even, from exploding in a storm of aggression. She took a cautious step towards him, raising her hands.
"It's not really that simple, Zala. Yes, she looks like a remnant machine, but the truth is a bit more complex. Boss, Midnight, you'll explain this better than I can ever hope to, so if you would be so kind."
And so they did just that. Together they told the entire story. How Marianne became Midnight, how she lost her processing core, and how she was now trying to find her memories and physical body, while also doing her best to keep remnant machines away from human space. They, of course, omitted the fact that she sicked remnant warships at the mercenaries who followed them, because even though they wanted to be honest, this would have probably been too much. It took a good while to explain everything, with House and Zala asking questions every now and then, while Dr. Disco stayed silent, and Varuna noticed barely even blinked as he stared intently at Midnight's face on the screen. When the story was finally told, the lieutenant could swear Disco was about to explode from his own blood pressure.
"Well, this is even more to take in, Chief," Zala said, turning to Mr. Cart. "And I don't trust this thing. It openly says that it doesn't remember parts of its own existence, and the fact that it can't access its core means that someone else may be able to do it and turn her against us. But at the same time, she does sound reasonable and honest enough, as far as I can tell. And it does say it has a human part, so perhaps there is a soul worthy of salvaging somewhere between those ones and zeros. I doubt it, but I trust you, Chief. Let's say the word, and me and my lads will bring out the flamers, the heavy flamers."
"I mean, if it wanted to fuck us up, it had plenty of chances to do so, girl,"
House said.
Look, I know they have a shit rep around the place, but so do we, and here we are trying to get our fresh start. So, who's to say we can't give it a chance to prove itself as well, eh? And besides, it's been decades since AI war happened. Might be a good time to stop holding a grudge.
Mr. Cart nodded to that, surprised by this open-mindedness, but Dr. Disco snarled like an enraged animal and took a step back away from House.
The only reason you say that is because you want to lay your hands on remnant weapons, you goddamn cyborg, he growled. Because I refuse to believe you, or anyone else in this room, is naive enough to believe that this thing won't turn against us when it suits it. You are lying to yourselves, and this thing tells you what you want to hear to further its own goals, but I can guarantee you, it will get us killed the moment we no longer suit its needs.
Doctor, I understand your family had bad experiences with remnants, but Mr. Cart started, but Disco wasn't done yet.
You don't know anything, Commander. My father may be a megalomaniac asshole, but he faced these machines before, and he knows how dangerous they are. My mother paid with her life because Tritak thought creating AI machines was a smart idea, despite the fact Domain and everyone else banned the bloody things. They didn't do it because they didn't like them. They did it because they are a threat to humanity itself.
I agree, but Midnight is not just a machine.
So she told you. But how can you prove this, Commander? How can she prove any of her words are true? If these things are capable of thought, then they can also lie and spin sob stories like this one to get under our skin, so we can help them destroy us from within.
I agree again.
They can lie. Hell, she did lie to us several times, but not to hurt us. Besides, do you really think that she's like all the remnants out there? How do they react to human visitors, usually? With violence. But those under Midnight's command always left us alone. They left everyone alone. Isn't that at least a partial proof that she's not plotting to destroy us? No. All it means is that her logic may be evolved enough to play the long game, Commander. I respect you. You are a stranger in a strange place, and you do your best to not be an evil person, but this is the kind of naive stupidity that will end us all. And now that I think about it, I understand. You want her to be a good guy in your head, because she said she was from your time. It is something you can connect to.
You are right. Yes, it is exactly that. But I also have been in contact with her long before even Varuna knew about her existence, and she always was helpful. And I admit, I do have my doubts even now, but I refuse to destroy a living, intelligent entity solely because other things based on her were used in warfare by a greedy corporation. If you want to be furious at someone, be angry at Tritakian, not at Midnight.
There is no need to argue over this point, Pilot Cart,
Midnight interjected calmly.
Dr. Disco considers me untrustworthy, a sentiment I am more than familiar with, and it is an understandable sentiment, due to all the sorrow the collective I am now part of caused. And so, I present an offering. As I mentioned before, we are looking for my core processing unit. Should we find it, and should you still consider me unworthy of your trust then, you have my permission to destroy it, and me along with it, Doctor.
And how do I know I can trust you, machine? How can I know you're not just going to go back on your word, or if this isn't some kind of bait or a trap?
You cannot know that. You can only take my word for it, which I admit is not worth anything to you. But I see no other rational way of convincing you, other than working side by side.
Disco scowled at that. The very idea was clearly not something he'd consider sane, but under heavy looks of his fellow crewmates he finally nodded.
I demand access to your internal processes, right now, and wherever I think you're lying to us.
Acceptable. Sending data now,
Midnight replied, and immediately a massive stream of data appeared on Disco's datapad, so much of it that it immediately started lagging.
I apologize. Our entire process may be a bit too much for other machines, but we can send data piece by piece if such is your wish.
Disco just muttered some curses under his breath, staring at the stream of numbers and letters as if trying to divine some meaning from them. Something that no real living human being could ever hope to do.
"Well, that's all then," Varuna said, trying to sound cheerful. "Question though, are you really willing to die for Doctor's sake?"
"Yes," Midnight said, and there was a degree of sadness in her robotic voice.
"At least I want to. The part of me that is Marianne DeWitt. The consensus is a machine, so it wants to preserve itself. But me? Well, sometimes I'm tired of this existence. It is decidedly not what I hoped for when I began this project."
"Now that you mention it, it is weird that you were allowed to do this thing in the first place, considering all the band's domain had on even mentioning artificial intelligence," Disco said. "And besides, why did they ban it in the first place?"
"The historical records I have are sketchy, but from what I know, Domain tried at least twice to create a sentient AI, and both times it became hostile towards its creators upon reaching a certain point in its evolution. That is why they banned it. But that is also why they were less inclined to ban my project, because they hoped that a mix of human and a machine would work better and could even become a next step on human evolutionary ladder."
And we all know how well that ended, with tritakian machines going rogue and killing millions of people.
"Correct, but those machines lacked this crucial human part I possess. They are different from me, and they, like you, mistrust me for it."
"Hated by humans, hated by machines," Zala said quietly. "Must be lonely being you." Dr. Disco blinked when she heard that, as if a new, unexpected thought popped into his brain. He turned around on his heel and left without saying a single word.
"It sometimes is,"
Midnight continued when the doors shut down behind him.
"Maybe if other sentient AI existed, one not shackled to tritakian war machine, then it could develop a real personality and act as a companion or a conversation partner. But I am not sure if it would not consider me as a potential hostile as well, precisely because of my human element. Mathematically, I am aware that this is a situation that I cannot win. Neither humans nor AI will accept me, and that is why I want to find my physical processing unit. Once I have it, I will leave. Or maybe I will throw it into the sun and cease to function. I do not know yet."
"Maybe there will be no need for that," Zala said, even though she didn't really feel any empathy towards Midnight. There were just too many decades of prejudice grafted into her brain for that. But she tried, and that's what mattered.
"Perhaps. First we need to find it, though."
"That we do. And we also have another researcher to find," Mr. Katz said, hoping to end this uncomfortable conversation and get back to work. Except this time, it's a researcher who doesn't want to be found. So, let's get on with it. Varuna, plot a course for Tritak space. We'll see what this Arroyo guy can offer us. And so Varuna did just that. But after House and Zala left, she approached her boss again.
"You really think they won't rat us out?"
"Yes, because now they're all part of this secret," he replied. "I didn't tell them about Midnight just because I wanted to be honest, but because now they're all part of this. This is all to ensure they won't just leave one day, because we need them. I need them for my plan to work."
"And that plan is?"
"Exactly what Provost said, getting the gates to work," Mr. Cat replied, and Varuna knew that he wasn't lying. But she was also sure that while Anahita Bed's objective was the same, they both had wildly different ideas on what to do once the job was done. If it could even be done, she added in her mind, and then got back to work. Few days later, the fleet, quietly and with all precautions, approached Iokabres, capital planet of Tritakian Corporation. It was a cold and only marginally habitable world, where most of the human inhabitants huddled together in a single, tired hive megacity, where the poorest lived at the literal bottom of society, while executives and directors basked in the sun at the very top of a massive, well-maintained ecology. Tritakian never spared an opportunity to show its employees how hierarchy worked, and the city itself, structured like a malformed pyramid, was a perfect example. The rich didn't even have to gaze down upon the unwashed masses below, while the grey droves of corporate drones always saw the glistening archaeology right above them, a constant reminder of who was in charge. And, on many other worlds, in some different cultures, such disparity in wealth, displayed with such disdain for the poor, would be enough for the masses to rise up. But Tritakian didn't even have to police their own street all that much, for almost every single living being on the planet was employed by the company, and the company ensured that a certain level of, as they said, healthy competition was always present amongst the population. Varuna shrugged when she saw the city on the sensors, as the fleet took position in orbit above the world. It looked like a rat warren, and that's what it was. A place where constant rat race took place, where people would betray and swindle each other not even for profit, but for the promise of it. There was no need for police when every employee spied on their co-workers above and below them all the time in hopes of learning something that would be noticed and get them promoted just a single step up on the corporate ladder. In every street, in every alley, in every home, people wore their best and most ingenuine smiles, always looking for an opportunity to rip out your throat and report you to the superiors. And often they didn't even receive anything for it. A report was often made just to remove a coworker that may, one day, be considered a potential threat. It was, in short, a corporation like all others. Nothing changed from days of old Earth. Fortunately, this Arroyo man the company wanted to visit was not living in the city. He was rich enough to have a massive, high-tech villa far enough from the bustle of the city and all the plebs and sycophants that came with it. He was also, as it turned out, unwilling to live for a talk.
"I apologize, but Mr. Arroyo is not currently available for meetings,"
his servant said over the comms, with this smug self-satisfaction every butler had when they finally had power over something.
"If you wish to leave a message or present your, no doubt unprofitable trade opportunity, please send a message and I will ensure it is delivered when good master has a spare moment."
House cracked his fingers looking at the comm and proposed to go down to the surface to have a talk, both with the valet and with Arroyo himself, but Mr. Cart silenced him. Instead, he simply leaned back on his chair and said, "Very well. If your boss doesn't have time for academy business, then we shall take it elsewhere." The butler went pale when he heard it and cut the comm. A minute later, another person, immaculately dressed and groomed, wearing fancy black-blue suit, appeared on the screen. He looked both scared and angry at the same time.
"Sorry for the wait, Spacers. I was in the middle of something. I am, of course, always happy to help the, pursuit of knowledge the Academy preaches. However, I am not one for such impersonal conversation, so I'd like you to come here to my villa where we can talk. In private." He said these last two words with extreme force. Then, before anyone could question it, he sent in coordinates, ground control approach codes, and cut off the comm, clearly unwilling to say even a single word over a potentially unsecured comm channel. Mr. Cart looked at his officers in response. "Well, I'm not going down there, boss," Varuna said sternly. "I take one step on the surface of that planet and I'll be picked up by every single security system they have." "I know, but I can't go too, so it has to be someone else." "Maybe Ludwig. He's part of the corporation after all," Zala wondered. "Yes, and this is precisely why he can't go either," Varuna replied. "The moment he realizes Arroyo is one of the executives, he will just roll over and sell us out. And Zala, no offense, but you look like a pather with that eye patch and the scars, so that leaves Disco and—"
Oh, yes, I will go,"
House said, with organic half of his face smiling brightly. Everyone took a step back and gave him a horrified look. "Maybe we should let the good doctor take the lead on this, eh?" Zala tried. "You know, you need to look presentable to meet an executive and, you don't even own a suit."
"That's where you're wrong, missy,"
House replied, smiling even more widely now. His human eye was manic.
"Let me just do a quick shave and shower and I'll be good to go in 10 minutes.
In reality, it took almost an hour, but when House walked out of Second Chance's shower room, he certainly made an impression. "Oh God," Zala said. Varuna just hid her face in her hands, while Dr. Disco stared at old pirate captain without blinking, like he just saw some terrifying tumor on one of his patients.
"Huh? I clean up nicely, huh?"
House said, bristling with joy. And indeed, he was clean. His skin tone was at least 2 tones brighter now, and his hair, which were the color of dirt most of the time, were now almost entirely white, and he clearly put in a lot of effort to untangle them from their usual mess, probably at the expense of several dozen combs. There were also some small spatters of blood and burns on his face, because after so many years of growing a stubble, House's facial hair had to be removed with an industrial laser cutter, and the suit... "We just pressed it," Varuna said, her voice broken. It wasn't that House didn't try, but it was like he projected some internal mess field around himself. The suit, which Varuna pressed so much you could shave with it, was already wrinkly and spattered with small drops of some unknowable dirt. Everyone in the room wondered if House could make wrinkles on a suit of power armor, and came to conclusion that yes, he probably could. But the man smiled brightly, and so no one dared to say anything, except for Mr. Card, that is. "You know you look like you ripped this suit from a corpse in some dark alley, right?" In response, House's smile widened even more, threatening to split his face in half.
"Aye, Cap'n. This cozy suit down there expects a fancy soiree, or however the fuck you pronounce it. But we're not here for fancy talk, Cap'n, we're here for business. So I'm going to let him know right away where he stands. No, but I'll do it in a proper corporate way, in white gloves,"
he added, and put on a pair of white gloves. They didn't fit him, nor the suit itself at all.
"Last thing we need is to give some exec ideas that we're his friends, eh?"
"Suppose so, Captain," Zala nodded. "You know, you may actually be the best man for such negotiation. That man's probably going to do everything just to get you to leave."
"That is the plan, girl."
House winked at her and boarded the shuttle, preparing his most diplomatic smile, which is to say he looked like a shark who just spotted its prey. This, Mr. Cart thought as he watched the shuttle descend towards the planet, would, without a doubt, go completely right.